The quiet cafe moment that no one expected. The story begins on a cold Chicago evening, the kind where the wind feels like it carries memories from years ago. The streets were busy, but the little corner cafe on West Ontario Street was strangely calm. Soft yellow lights glowed through the windows, and steam curled up from cups placed near the glass. Inside that calm space, something happened that made every person who later watched the footage feel their chest tighten. Because inside that cafe, KeanuReeves sat alone, wearing a simple black jacket, his hair tied loosely, looking like a man who carried both peace and storms inside him. But the hook is this: people thought he came there alone. They thought it was just another quiet moment in his private life. But 5 minutes later, the cafe door opened, and Sandra Bullock walked in with a scarf around her neck, her face half hidden. She walked straight to his table with a small smile, like someone who knew this place was a safe zone, far from cameras, far from pressure, far from loud questions about the past. The moment she sat down, something changed in the air. Two close friends, two souls who had always been gentle with each other, met again after months apart. No one expected what would happen next. As soon as she sat, Keanu reached across the table and held her hand. Not in a romantic way, not in a dramatic way, but in a soft, steady way that spoke of deep trust. Even the barista who was cleaning cups nearby felt a strange silence fall over them. Keanu whispered something to Sandra, something too quiet for even the hidden microphones to catch. But her eyes softened, her shoulders relaxed, and she took a slow breath like she had been holding something heavy inside her chest for too long. That is when the first twist happened. Outside the window, a taxi stopped and someone stepped out with a camera. No one inside noticed at first. Keanu kept speaking with that calm, gentle tone he was known for. Sandra played with the edge of her cup, listening with full attention. For a moment, they looked like two people who had forgotten the world, and maybe they had, because when the first flash of the camera hit the window, it startled the barista, but not them. They stayed still. Sandra looked up slowly, surprised but not scared. Keanu squeezed her hand gently, as if reminding her she was not alone. But the paparazzi outside had no idea they were capturing something that would break millions of hearts online, because it wasn't a scandal. It wasn't gossip. It wasn't drama. It was two people showing real kindness at a table in a small cafe. Keanu leaned forward and said softly, almost in a whisper, "Take a breath, I'm here." And Sandra finally let a tear fall, one single tear. She brushed it away quickly, but it was too late. The moment was caught on camera, and in the quiet of that cafe, a story larger than anyone expected began. But here is the real emotional pull. That tear wasn't from sadness. It was from relief, from trust, from years of friendship that never faded, from carrying too much alone and suddenly finding someone who understood without explanation. People always saw them as strong, successful stars. But in that cafe, they were just two humans who needed a gentle moment. And that is exactly what made the world stop when the pictures later came out. The truth is that cafe meeting was not planned for attention. It was a private promise they made long ago. And tonight, that promise was finally kept. The promise they never told anyone about. The moment Sandra's tear fell, everything inside the cafe shifted. The barista stopped wiping the counter. The couple near the door turned their heads slowly. It was one of those moments where time seemed to pause, holding its breath. But the hook begins right here. That tear was not random. It was connected to a promise they made almost 20 years ago, a promise neither of them ever shared publicly. Keanu watched her carefully, his eyes soft but sharp, like he was trying to understand the weight she carried. Sandra gave a weak smile, the kind people give when they are trying to stay strong even though their heart is tired. She whispered, "I didn't want to cry today." Keanu shook his head gently, his voice steady and quiet. "You don't have to hide anything from me, not here, not now." Those words broke something inside her. She looked down at the table, her fingers tracing the little spoon, and then finally said the sentence she had been holding for months. "I'm overwhelmed, Keanu. Life feels loud again." Her voice cracked, but she kept talking, the way people do when they finally feel safe enough to let the truth out. But right when she was speaking, another camera flash came from outside. Then another, then a third, brighter and closer. The paparazzi had realized who was inside, and suddenly the quiet cafe turned into a silent storm. The customers shifted nervously. Someone whispered, "That's Sandra Bullock, right?" Another said, "And Keanu, what are they doing here together?" The curiosity grew, and the outside world pushed harder. And this is the twist. Instead of getting up and leaving, instead of hiding his face or pulling his hood tighter, Keanu stayed completely calm. He placed his hand on the table again, close to hers, creating a small circle of quiet. It was his way of saying she was not going through this moment alone. It was simple but powerful. Sandra closed her eyes for a second and whispered, "Do you remember the deal we made?" Keanu smiled softly, a rare, warm smile that softened his whole face. "Of course I do. I never forgot." Their promise was simple but emotional. Back when they were filming together many years ago, they made a quiet pact. Anytime one of them felt lost or tired or overwhelmed by life, they would meet somewhere private, away from cameras, away from noise. No questions, no judgment, no pressure, just support, just peace. That cafe was their chosen place this time. But things didn't go the way they hoped. The world had found them, and Sandra's voice trembled with worry. "Everyone will twist this, Keanu. They always do." Keanu shook his head with slow, steady confidence. "Let them. People will believe what they want. We know the truth, and the truth matters more." His calmness surprised her. It always did. He had this strange, rare ability to stay centered even when the world burned around him. It was one of the reasons she trusted him deeply. Not because he was perfect, but because he was steady. She leaned back and took a deep breath, trying to pull herself together. Keanu gently pushed a cup of warm tea toward her. She smiled at the small act because he remembered she always drank tea when she was anxious. It was such a simple detail, but it meant everything. Few people remembered the quiet things. But then comes another emotional hook. Sandra placed her hand on the cup, and for the first time in the night, she finally revealed a truth she had been hiding from everyone. A truth that made Keanu freeze in place, his calm expression shifting into quiet concern. She whispered, "I didn't come here only because I was overwhelmed. Something happened, Keanu, and I didn't know who else to talk to." His fingers tightened slightly against the edge of the table, his voice low, steady. "What happened?" Sandra looked down, her breath shaking softly. "I think someone I love is in trouble." And that is where the second twist begins. The truth she finally shared. The moment Sandra said those words, the warmth inside the cafe felt colder. Even the lights above their table seemed to dim, as if the room itself understood something heavy had just been spoken. Keanu leaned forward, his eyes steady, his voice calm but filled with quiet urgency. "Tell me everything," he whispered. "You're safe here." This is where the hook pulls tighter. Sandra hesitated, her fingers trembling around the warm cup. She looked around the cafe once, noticing the customers pretending not to listen but clearly curious. Outside, more paparazzi had gathered, their shadows visible through the frosted glass. Yet inside, at that small wooden table, Sandra felt a strange kind of safety. Maybe because she knew Keanu wouldn't let her face this alone. She took a shaky breath and began. "It started weeks ago," she said softly. "Small things at first, messages that didn't feel right, someone calling from hidden numbers, someone following the people I care about." Her voice broke slightly, and she lifted her hand to her forehead, closing her eyes like she was trying to stop the memories from rushing in too fast. Keanu didn't interrupt. He stayed perfectly still, absorbing every word. He had always been that kind of listener, calm, patient, never rushing her, never making her feel dramatic or unreasonable. It was one of the reasons she trusted him more than most people in her life. Sandra continued, "I've dealt with attention my whole life, but this felt different. It felt targeted." She blinked, trying to steady her breathing. "And last night someone left something outside my door, a note, 3 words, no signature." Keanu's jaw tightened slightly. "What did it say?" Sandra opened her eyes slowly, and for a moment she looked younger, more vulnerable, like someone who had been carrying fear alone for too long. "It said, 'I know everything.'" Keanu paused. His fingers slowly curled around the edge of the table as he absorbed the weight of that message. The cafe noise faded into a low hum behind them. Outside, the paparazzi continued flashing their cameras, unaware that something far more serious was unfolding inside. Then came another twist, the emotional punch that kept viewers locked in. Keanu asked quietly, "Why didn't you tell anyone sooner? Why not security? Why not your team?" Sandra shook her head instantly. "Because this isn't about me, Keanu. It's about someone I love, and if I involve the wrong people, it could get worse. I needed someone I trust, someone calm, someone who doesn't panic." Her eyes met his. "That's you." Keanu's throat tightened for a moment. He wasn't used to being the person someone leaned on emotionally, not at this level. He was always the steady one for strangers, fans, people passing by. But Sandra asking for help, that was different, deeper, and it stirred something inside him, something protective. He asked gently, "Who is in trouble?" Sandra hesitated again, her fingers digging slightly into the cup. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Louis. Keanu's eyes widened just a bit. Louis, her adopted son, the sweet boy she loved more than anything, the child she protected fiercely from the public eye. Keanu leaned closer, lowering his voice even more. What happened to him? Sandra exhaled shakily. He said someone has been watching him at school, following him home. He didn't want to scare me, so he kept it to himself. But last night, he admitted everything. She swallowed hard. He thinks someone wants something from me, and they're using him to get it. Keanu's calm expression shifted into something sharper, stronger. His protective instincts rose instantly. Sandra, this isn't something you should handle alone. She nodded slowly. I know, that's why I came, because you never turn away from people who need help, and because you don't make everything worse with panic. Keanu sighed softly, then reached out and placed his hand over hers. We'll figure this out, I promise you, but you have to trust me fully, no hiding. Her eyes softened. I do trust you, Keanu, maybe more than anyone. But then comes an unexpected emotional twist. Just as Keanu opened his mouth to speak again, the cafe door swung open with a loud crack. Cold wind rushed in. Every head turned. A stranger in a dark coat stepped inside. And the moment he looked at Keanu and Sandra, his expression changed in a way that made Keanu's spine tighten. The stranger who knew too much. The cafe door slammed shut behind the stranger, and the sudden noise cut through the room like a sharp blade. The customers froze for a moment, glancing between the man and the table where Keanu and Sandra sat. The barista's hand stopped midair, holding a towel that had been wiping a cup only seconds earlier. The whole place felt like it had been pulled into a quiet, tense pause. Even the wind outside seemed to wait. The stranger wore a long, dark coat, wet at the edges from melted snow. His steps were slow, controlled, and his eyes scanned the room with a sharpness that made Sandra's shoulders tighten instantly. She lowered her gaze, but Keanu watched the man carefully, his calm expression sharpening just enough to show he was alert. This is the hook of part 4. The stranger did not look like a fan or a random customer or even a paparazzi trying to sneak inside. There was something different, something heavier, something that made the cafe feel smaller. The man took a step closer, his gaze locking onto their table as if he already knew exactly who he came for. Keanu leaned slightly forward, his voice low and steady. Stay calm, he whispered to Sandra. Don't look scared. But Sandra's breath caught anyway. Her fingers tightened around the cup, and Keanu gently covered her hand with his. It was a simple gesture, but it grounded her, helped her breathe again. The stranger stopped at the counter first. He ordered a coffee, his voice rough but controlled. Then, without waiting for his drink, he turned directly toward Keanu and Sandra's table. Sandra's heart dropped. She whispered, Keanu, I think he's one of them. Keanu didn't look away from the stranger. Let's not assume yet, he murmured. Let him speak. The man approached their table slowly, stopping just a few feet away. He didn't smile. He didn't pretend. He spoke directly, his voice low enough that the rest of the cafe could barely hear. Sorry to interrupt, but I think you dropped something outside. Sandra's chest tightened. I didn't drop anything. The man reached into his coat. Sandra flinched, but Keanu didn't move. He watched with a calm intensity, prepared for anything. The man pulled out a small white envelope and placed it gently on their table. Keanu looked at the envelope without touching it. That's not ours. The stranger tilted his head slightly. I think it is. There was something unsettling in the way he said it, too sure, too precise. Keanu's jaw tightened. Why do you think this belongs to us? The stranger shrugged in a cold, casual way. The handwriting looked familiar. Sandra swallowed hard. She whispered, Keanu, I know that envelope. Keanu slowly pushed the envelope closer to her. Open it only if you're ready. Her fingers shook as she slid it open. Inside was a single paper, folded once. She unfolded it with care, and her face paled instantly. She tried to hand it to Keanu, but her hands trembled too much. He gently took it from her and read the 4 words written in black ink. He is not safe. Keanu's breath stopped for half a second. Louis. The message was about Louis. Again. This wasn't a warning from a stranger. It was from the same person who had been following Sandra's family. Keanu looked up at the man, his eyes colder now, sharper. Who gave this to you? The man smiled slightly, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was the kind that said he knew something they didn't. Just someone outside, he said quietly. Someone who didn't want to come in. Keanu stood slowly, not aggressively, but in a way that made the entire room shift with him. He was calm, but there was something powerful in his posture, something protective. The stranger's smile faded the moment Keanu rose. He took a step back instinctively. Keanu's voice was low, controlled, but carried a quiet steel. If you know anything about who is targeting her family, you need to say it now. The man shook his head. I'm just delivering messages, I don't ask questions. But you know who sent it, Keanu said calmly. You knew to bring it to this table, you knew her name, you knew my name. The stranger hesitated. And that hesitation was all they needed to know he was hiding something. Sandra's voice broke through the silence, fragile but filled with fear. Please, just tell us what's going on. The stranger looked at her with a strange expression, almost regret. You should leave this cafe now, he said quietly. Both of you, before things get worse. Keanu stepped closer. Why? The man took a slow breath. Because someone else is watching you right now. And before Keanu could respond, the cafe window shattered. The shattering glass and the truth they couldn't escape. The sound of the window breaking cut through the cafe like thunder. Glass exploded inward in a bright, terrifying burst, scattering across the floor and tables. Customers screamed. Chairs scraped loudly. Someone ducked behind the counter. The barista dropped a tray of cups that shattered right after the window did. The whole cafe turned into a storm of noise and fear. But in the middle of that chaos, Keanu moved fast. Not as an actor, not as a celebrity, but as a human instinctively protecting someone he cared deeply about. He pulled Sandra close, shielding her with his body as the glass fell. She gasped, her hands gripping his jacket. Her heart pounded against his chest, but she stayed still because she trusted him. She felt his warmth, his steadiness, and for a moment, even inside the chaos, she felt a strange sense of safety. The stranger who had delivered the envelope stumbled backward, shocked, not expecting the explosion. He raised his hands, showing he had nothing to do with it. Customers rushed toward the back door, some crying, some frozen, unsure of where the danger was coming from. Keanu whispered, "Stay low, stay behind me," his voice calm but urgent. Sandra nodded, trembling, trying to steady her breath. She felt the weight of everything collapsing at once. First the messages, then the stranger, and now this. Someone was forcing their way into her life in a way she never imagined. Keanu slowly helped Sandra crouch beside him, guiding her toward the corner of the cafe where they would be out of direct view of the broken window. His body remained slightly in front of hers, blocking any stray glass. This is where the emotional twist hits. Sandra realized that Keanu wasn't scared for himself. He was scared for her, and that made her chest tighten with a different kind of fear and a deep sense of gratitude. The cafe owner rushed forward yelling, "Everyone stay inside, don't go near the front." But his voice shook. No one felt safe. Keanu turned to the stranger. "Who is watching us?" he demanded, his voice low and controlled. "You knew something would happen." The stranger shook his head quickly. "I didn't know this, I swear. I just deliver messages, I don't hurt people." Sandra whispered, "But someone wanted that window to break. Someone wanted to scare us." Keanu looked outside through the shattered frame. The street beyond was empty, too empty. The taxis that were there earlier were gone. The paparazzi who had crowded the sidewalk had disappeared almost instantly. No camera flashes, no running footsteps, just silent wind and swirling snow. That silence was the most frightening part. Keanu stood halfway, still shielding Sandra. Whoever did this is close, they're still watching. Sandra swallowed hard, tears burning behind her eyes. "This is because of Louis, isn't it? They want me scared, they want me cornered." Keanu squeezed her hand gently. "Maybe, but you're not alone. I won't let anything happen to you." His voice was soft but strong, and it pulled her out of the rising panic building inside her chest. She took a shaky breath, then another, grounding herself in his words. Then comes another twist. The stranger in the dark coat looked down at the ground with guilt in his eyes. "You need to leave this place right now," he said softly. "The one who left that message, he's getting impatient." Keanu stepped closer to him. "Tell us who he is." The stranger hesitated again. "I don't know his name," he whispered. "He never gave it, but there's something you should know." The cafe had gone silent. Even the customers hiding behind tables were listening. The man continued, voice low. He said you would understand the warning better if the glass broke first. Keanu's eyes hardened. Why? The man swallowed. Because, he said, the next warning won't be a window. Sandra felt her heart stop for a second. She whispered, Keanu, what does that mean? Keanu didn't answer. He already knew. The next warning would be aimed at someone living. Sandra grabbed his arm tightly, her voice trembling. We have to protect Louis. We have to go now. Keanu nodded. We will, but we need to be careful. Whoever is behind this is watching our choices. But just as they moved toward the back exit, a small buzzing sound echoed from Sandra's bag. Her phone. She slowly pulled it out with shaking hands. A new message. From an unknown number. Keanu leaned close as she opened it. And the message froze both of them where they stood. You left him alone too long. You shouldn't have. The moment that changed everything. The message on Sandra's phone felt colder than the winter wind blowing through the shattered cafe window. The words stayed on the screen like a threat carved in stone. Sandra's breath stopped. Her whole body went numb. Keanu, she whispered, her voice small and trembling. Louis, he's alone. He's alone right now. Keanu took her phone gently, his eyes scanning the message again, his jaw tightening with silent determination. He didn't panic. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't freeze. Instead, he moved with purpose, grounding Sandra as her fear grew too heavy to hold alone. He took her shoulders in his hands and said softly, We're going, right now. The customers still hiding behind tables watched as Keanu guided Sandra toward the back door. The cafe owner tried to speak, but Keanu just nodded politely, the kind of respectful gesture he always gave, even in chaos. It was strange how calm he looked while the world felt like it was falling apart. Once outside in the alley behind the cafe, the air hit them like ice. Sandra shivered. Keanu pulled off his jacket and wrapped it around her without hesitation, even though the cold bit at him instantly. Stay close, he whispered. We will reach him. But the stranger followed them out. You shouldn't go alone, he warned. This is bigger than you think. Keanu turned to him, his voice steady, almost gentle, but firm. Thank you for the warning, but we're done running. If you know anything that can help us get to her son faster, tell me now. The man lowered his gaze. There is something, he whispered. The person who sent that message, he watches patterns, he studies routines, he knows when you leave home, he knows when you come back, and he knows when a child is alone. Sandra's heart twisted painfully. Please, do you know where he is? The man hesitated, then nodded slowly. He's near your neighborhood, not inside your home, watching from outside. Keanu grabbed Sandra's hand gently. We have to go. They hurried down the alley. Snow crunched under their feet. Their breaths formed white clouds in the freezing air. Sandra's steps were shaky at first, but Keanu held her hand tightly, guiding her forward, grounding her when her fear tried to pull her down. No paparazzi followed, no cameras. The city suddenly felt empty, as if Chicago itself was holding its breath. Once they reached the car, Keanu opened the door for her, the way he always did with simple kindness, even in moments like this. He got in beside her, turned on the engine, and whispered, We'll get there. Breathe, I'm with you. Those words kept her from falling apart. The drive felt endless. Every red light made her heart race. Every shadow on the street looked threatening. Sandra kept whispering, Please let him be okay. Keanu reached over and gently held her hand on her lap, his thumb brushing over her trembling fingers. He will be, Keanu said softly, more like a promise than a guess. But when they turned onto her street, the real twist hit. The porch lights were on. The front door was unlocked. And Louis stood inside the doorway, wrapped in a blanket, safe. Sandra's breath broke into a sob. She rushed out of the car and ran to him. Louis cried when she held him, burying his face in her neck. Keanu followed quietly, checking the surroundings with sharp eyes. Sandra kissed Louis's hair again and again, whispering, you're safe, I'm here. Louis sniffled. Someone was outside, he whispered. I didn't open the door, I hid like you told me. Sandra pulled him closer. You did the right thing, baby. Keanu stepped onto the porch, scanning the dark street. Then he found something in the snow, footprints leading into the alley beside the house. The threat was real. Someone had been there, someone who wanted fear, not violence, yet. But here comes the emotional turn that changes everything. Louis looked at Keanu and whispered, Thank you for protecting my mom. Sandra turned, her eyes full of tears. He did more than protect me. He helped me breathe again. Keanu shook his head softly. You both protected yourselves too. Courage isn't loud, sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's just holding on. Sandra stepped closer to him. Keanu, you didn't have to do any of this, but you never left. Her voice trembled. Thank you. Keanu looked at her with gentle eyes, the kind that carried years of understanding. I told you, we made a promise long ago. No matter how much time passes, I'll always show up when you need someone. The police arrived minutes later. Officers took notes, examined footprints, and reassured Sandra that they would increase patrols around her home. But even after they left, Sandra and Louis stayed close to Keanu, like he was the anchor holding their world steady. And when the night grew quiet again, Sandra whispered a line that broke every heart watching. You came when I was falling apart. That means more than you know. Keanu smiled softly, the kind of smile that carried warmth deeper than words. You're not alone, Sandra. Not now, not ever. Their moment on the porch was gentle, warm, and painfully real. Two humans who found strength in kindness, humility, and connection, even in fear. The world would later react to the paparazzi photos with shock, not because of drama, but because people saw truth in those images. Two hearts leaning on each other, two friends holding the weight of the world with quiet courage. And that was the moment that melted every heart.